Patrick Ruffini, thanks so much for joining us tonight. Everyone had been sort of expecting Donald Trump to win in Iowa, but what's your take on the overall result and what it means for the race from here on in?
Yeah, so I think there was no suspense in the fact that Donald Trump did win Iowa, won it, it appears, with a narrow majority. But the big suspense was who was going to take second place. I do think that had Ron Desantis, who had staked really everything on Iowa, had he finished third, I think it would have been very difficult to argue how he could have gone on. Now, I think he has some reason for hanging around in the race, but the question is, what role will he play? Going into New Hampshire is a very different state from Iowa. And, in particular, a lot of the candidates who do well in Iowa don't tend to do as well in New Hampshire, with a very independent minded electorate, many voters who come from outside the Republican Party, which is why Nikki Haley has been tapped to, potentially knock off Donald Trump in the New Hampshire primary. But when you look at states further down in the calendar, you look at states like South Carolina, which is Nikki Haley's home state, but nonetheless a very conservative state that should be a Trump state. And you look at other states in the primary calendar, it does seem that Ron DeSantis has a reason now to stick around. The challenge for him, though, I think, is one where his narrative, his campaign is saying, I'm really the only one who can go toe to toe against Donald Trump because I'm the only one who has support, among conservative Republicans, and that's where my base of voters is. But there's no indication from the results tonight that those voters are in any way dissatisfied with Donald Trump, and they rewarded him with a majority of the vote in Iowa.
Well, indeed, it's striking that 6 out of 10 voters who voted for Donald Trump this time classified themselves as ultra-conservative, whereas in, say, 2016, it was really moderate voters who supported him. What does this suggest for Ron DeSantis's chances from here on in?
Yeah, it's just unclear, what his base is. In theory, right, a candidate like DeSantis, who comes from the right, should be competitive. But in practice, those voters are really in lockstep for Donald Trump right now. I think that this Iowa electorate also speaks to the changing nature of the Republican Party, because the Republican Party has realigned to become, a party of the working class, a party of the non-college educated voter. And you're seeing throughout rural Iowa, Trump receiving over 60, in some cases 70, and a few precincts, even 80% of the vote. And that's very difficult to compete with.
Well, how has Donald Trump actually harnessed these votes? He's getting immense support from the working class voters, despite his immense wealth, and evangelical voters are supporting him, despite some fairly questionable behaviour in the past.
I think it's his attitude, right? That was a real question surrounding him in 2016. But, in particular, socially conservative and evangelical voters who make up a majority of the Iowa electorate, what they saw in Donald Trump was, it wasn't necessarily that they want somebody who is sitting in the pews right alongside them, so much as somebody who fights for their agenda and fights for their issues and can actually win on their issues. And I think you would say that, particularly on the issue of Roe versus Wade, on appointing Supreme Court justices that overturned Roe versus Wade, he has delivered for that segment of the Republican Party.
What do we know about the way the 2024 Trump campaign is operating? It was infamously chaotic in 2016.
Yeah, I think it's much more professionalized in terms of, the staff. And, there was practically no Trump organization in 2016, that they fell pretty flat in the caucuses, which really require a high degree of organization. So by virtue of the fact that he was president, Trump has access to a lot of staff, a lot of experience from, folks who worked for him in 2020. But it's just a much more professional operation in terms of how they've approached this campaign, even I would say, even in comparison to how they approached 2020.
So is Donald Trump's nomination now inevitable, or is it too early to say?
I think it's pretty close. I mean, look, I think that you will see what happens in New Hampshire. That's really the only big question mark right now. And the case for Haley really is that a New Hampshire win would be transformative for her in the sense of, it would perhaps puncture the sense that Trump is an inevitable nominee, and would give her a huge boost of momentum that would pretty rapidly change the picture in a lot of states. And I think that is really the traditional primary playbook. But I think we've in many ways thrown out those rules. First of all, I think we have something very unconventional happening this year, which is Donald Trump is an incumbent president. You have never seen that, I think, in more than 100 years, an incumbent president coming back to run. As a result, he has a very strong reservoir of support, and it's going to be, I think, pretty difficult to dislodge that at this point.
Patrick Ruffini, thanks so much for talking to us tonight.
Thank you.